afternoon from ETH Zurich. Good afternoon to the students who are here in presence at the lecture hall at ETH Zurich. Good afternoon to Anne and Anna. Anne from Rome and Anna from somewhere out of Agroecology. We are very happy to have Anne and Anna and Anna's night tonight to talk about animals within agroecology as one of the lectures of the Agroecology and the Transition to Sustainable Food System public lecture series, which we organize from the World Food System Center and the Plant Science Group here at ETH. My name is Martin Sonneveld and I'm the moderator or host of tonight of the second in a row on agroecology, and I'm very happy to welcome you all here. Before I hand over to both Anne and Anna for their inputs, just a few words on the lecture series as such. If you have joined us last time, please forgive, there are some repetitions, but nevertheless, we think it's important to remind us how to place these interventions of both Anna and Anne this lecture. And now my clicker is not working, so I have to get here. Just why we're talking about it, for us, it's very important to talk about sustainable food system and remind ourselves that food systems are connecting us to all the sustainable development goals. And that's why it's so important to take a holistic perspective on the different aspects of agricultural production, but also on the different aspects of agroecology, and to remind ourselves that this is all embedded within a larger context linked to environmental aspects, very much to social aspects, but also economic ones. We try to define agroecology. We are talking about a science, a set of practice, and a social movement to cover the different elements which are important to agroecology and its role in food system transformation. About the dynamics within agroecosystems, it's about sustainable production practices which optimize and stabilize yields, but it's also about social aspects, cultural identity, justice, participation within food systems of different food system actors. So we have to understand agroecology from a holistic perspective. Here again, the definition of the high-level panel of experts to the CNS, the Committee of World Food Security. We're hence talking about natural processes, trying to limit the use of purchased external inputs, working towards closed cycles with minimal effect and externalities on the system. Do so bringing together different sources of knowledge, local knowledge, scientific evidence, bring them together and work in participatory processes to co-create also solutions and to develop together knowledge and practice through trying things out, but also to linking to scientific knowledge and scientific evidence-based. And all that also including various actors of the food system to fight also social inequalities. So agroecological approaches recognize that agri-food systems are coupled social ecological systems, bridging production with consumption and involve various actors along the value chain to address at the end the key outcomes of sustainable food systems, which are food and nutrition security, environmental and human health, but also social well-being. These are the 13 principles. We picked 5. Today, we are going to talk about animal health as one of the principles. And with the students, we will then explore after these 5 public lectures a bit deeper also the interactions between these different principles. Important for us is also to distinguish the different levels? Are we talking more about the agroecosystem, more about the food system? And it's also very interesting to think about how do the different principles contribute to incremental change of the system, or are they more of a transformative power in the way that they address then also food system transformation, and which actors are involved? Are we just involving farmers for certain principles which are linked to the way you produce on field sizes, on farms, or do we also encounter other actors in a landscape or water catchment approach, or then even go further into communities in food systems, or then at the end, including consumers too, in a more societal approach? As I said, it's a lectures of 5. We have today animal health with Anne-Motte and Anna. And just as a reminder to us as well, after this short input of myself, I'm happily handing over to Anne-Motte for input on her experience, her expertise, and how FAO is dealing with agroecology, before she then hands over directly to Anna to talk about the animal health aspect from a ruminant perspective and sharing her work at Agroecological, before then I get back to us all for a Q&A session. So please take the opportunity, write questions into the Q&A session, and we try to get these questions then discussed by Anna and Anne. Then we're closing the public part, and for the students, as last week, we will have the opportunity to chat in a more cozy and close circle again with both Anna and Anne. In that sense, I don't want to make it much longer. I ask both Anne-Motte and Anna Reiche to introduce themselves very briefly. But for now, thank you very much to both for being with us. And Anne, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Anne-Motte. I work at FAO, the agency of the United Nations specializing in food and agriculture. I work in particular in the livestock division, and I'm involved in climate change and agroecology programs of work in FAO. In particular, I'm co-leading a global tool for assessing agroecology in a variety of countries and systems. And this is also in partnership with ETH, and I'm going to tell you more about it later. Anna?
Yeah, my name is Anna Reiche. Good evening, everyone. I'm a researcher in the ruminant research group in Agroecological. So my focus is really animal science and ruminant science. I'm a veterinarian, and my research topics are mostly related to physiology and nutrition of ruminants.
So I'm going to start with a presentation I prepared for today, sharing some of our expertise in FAO and our experience with assessing agroecological systems and agroecological transitions. For this, I hope you can see my screen in full. Unless you're stopping me, I'm going to assume that's the case. And so this is a work that involves a lot of people. You can find a few names here on this slide, but also a lot of external partners. And I'll show you how we do that. So before I start with the actual experience and the tool and the results, just a couple of words on the context. So on our side, our observation was that livestock are usually less visible in the work on agroecology, especially when you look at the literature, but also in programs of works in various institutions. So there's really a gap to be filled there, because what we identify is that there's actually a very large potential, and I'm sure Anna will tell you more about this in practice, but just on the theory side, with FAO, we're actually working with a framework that is very complementary to the 13 principles that you're familiar with. We call it the 10 elements of agroecology. And those 10 elements, you can see them on this slide. They're really the results of a very large scale consultation over 4 years that we led in the entire world, in 7 different regional conferences and symposia, in order to find what we called common elements of what people refer to when they talk about agroecology. So whether they're practitioners, farmers, or extension workers, whether they're scientists, whether they're policymakers, those are the elements that we found are common. And when we try and link that with livestock production, we see that there's actually a very large potential that, as I said, is really not harvested enough at the moment. First, because livestock, whether they're ruminants or monogastrics, they're found in all agroecosystems, and they have a very large diversity of species and breeds and production systems. So they take the element of diversity. They can enhance food security and nutrition by providing access to nutrients-dense food, meat, milk, and eggs. So they also tick some boxes in terms of cultural and food tradition and human and social values for nutrition in particular. But also because they're key to the livelihoods of small-scale farmers, particularly women, but also pastoralists. So they support the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people in the world. For the elements of synergies and efficiency, well, we know that livestock increase agricultural productivity through integration with trees and crops, for example, if they provide manure for crop fertilization. And they also make use of biomass that humans cannot eat, like grass and straw, or waste even, like swill from monogastrics. So they contribute also to recycling and to the circular economy. I also already mentioned manure, but they also have roles in terms of resilience for the transfer of nutrients, the transfer of water, for example, and they can increase plant biodiversity in grasslands, which in turn enhances productivity, resilience, and other ecosystem services. So this is the positive contribution that they can make. Obviously, there are also negative ones to be mitigated. When I say that livestock are a bit overlooked, there still are some efforts to draw attention to their role in agroecological transitions. I just mentioned one here from a group of researchers from INRAE in France, who developed 5 principles for animal production and agroecology. I'm not going to stop here, but just to mention some work that has been done on this topic. But again, it's less documented than for crop production. So now, going into the actual content of my presentation, we were mandated by our member nations, so 194 countries, to develop a tool with indicators and specific metrics to assess agroecology in all types of production systems and countries. This was a request by policymakers, members of FAO, because they were lacking harmonized evidence to understand whether agroecology can actually make a positive contribution. And they were given access to some success stories, from some case studies, some isolated studies from specific systems or countries, but never in a harmonized and consolidated way at global level. So this is really the mandate that we received, and we responded through a very large consultative process involving lots of people, researchers, but also policymakers, also NGOs who were advocates for agroecological transition. And it's a tool that works with collection of data at farm level with an online tool that is based on the Agroecological platform and provides results at farm and territorial level. And we're using it for assessing agroecological transition, comparing farm types, etc. So I just indicated here the reference publication for that. And this is where we are at the moment with this tool. So it's been applied in a bit more than 30 countries for a bit more than 5,000 farms and households. We have 8 more countries coming soon in partnership with ATH. We also have an ongoing partnership with Agroecological in Switzerland and Kenya, and I'm sure Anna will say a few words about this. But you see the diversity of countries where we're working with this tool in order to assess agroecological transitions. I'm not going to go into the details of how it works, but I'm going to show you some results and focus a bit on livestock in particular. So this is a cross-country analysis that we did for 8 applications of tape in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have a bit less than 3,000 farms on that. And we first looked at how advanced were these farms from this sample in the agroecological transition. And we measured this by collecting information on the 10 elements at farm level. So for example, for the element of diversity, we have a descriptive scale for the diversity of animals, of crops, of trees, of production activities on farm or services. And we give a score for diversity this way. And then we do the same for all 10 elements. So we have about 40 questions to understand the level of transition based on the 10 elements. And what you see is that about 1/3 of the farms we surveyed are already engaged in the agroecological transition, meaning they have a score that is higher than 50% on the 10 elements in average. But we still have a large share that is just in initial phase or not even engaged in agroecological transition from this sample. So it's an interesting breakdown. Now, in terms of what we see in details, the first step of TAPE, I mentioned already, is what we, the level of agroecological transition, or what we call characterization of agroecological transition, CAET, which is based on the 10 elements. And I just presented that. But we have a second step, which is based on, if I manage to click, which is based on 10 core criteria of performance, which are not linked to agroecology as an approach per se. They can be used for any type of performance assessment in agriculture, and they have to do with sustainability in economic, environmental, and social terms. And you see here the first results from these farms. So you have the 10 criteria of performance in this column: land tenure, productivity, added value, and value added. Those are the economic criteria. Then for social, women empowerment and youth employment. For health, which is part also of social sustainability, we have exposure to pesticides and nutritional diversity. And for the environment, we're looking at agrobiodiversity and soil health. And the first, I'm not going to detail all the results, but what you see here is that you get a lot of positive and significant correlation, not always very high, but a lot of positive and significant correlations between those 10 elements, between what we can call agroecology and those core criteria of performance, which are objective performance that can be measured for any type of system. So for example, if you look at the element of synergy here, you have quite a strong and significant correlation with the level of agrobiodiversity on farm. So more synergies on farm contribute to increasing the level of biodiversity, or vice versa. You can also see, for example, that you have a very strong and positive correlation between the element of co-creation of knowledge, which is really part of agroecology. And thank you, Martin, for reminding us of the holistic definition of agroecology. And for example, the score in terms of women empowerment, or the same with human and social value and women empowerment. So the conclusion of this big analysis that I present here, which I don't have time to go into the details of, but it's really to show that the way we measure the agroecological transition in terms of 10 elements seems to be positively and significantly correlated to sustainability performance indicators. So some examples. We grouped the farms based on their aggregated transition score from less than 30% to over 70%. And we looked at the median of different economic indicators here: productivity per person, value added, and the net income per person. And you see that the more advanced farms on this transition, so the ones on the right-hand side of the screen, do have higher economic performance than the ones who are less advanced in their transition. So we do have a positive impact of advancing towards higher scores on the 10 elements with economic results of the farm. If we look at another indicator, for example, here we have a nutritional diversity score. It's the same trend we can observe. You have more diversity in the household in terms of the food consumed for farms that are more advanced in the agroecological transition. And those two results are very important because agroecology is often challenged, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of how it can deliver economically and in terms of food security and nutrition. So we're very, very happy to see those results. And then we went a little bit further, and this is where I'm going to start talking about the animals. We looked into different organization of the results we collected with, again, the same results, but we organized them a little bit different. And we created this kind of correlation map. And again, the one that is indicated with the red arrow here is what we call the characterization of agroecological transition. So it's a PCA based on the 10 elements of agroecology. And what we see here is that this particular variable is positively and significantly, again, correlated to most performance indicators, especially agrobiodiversity here that I circle, and but also women empowerment here, and all those very dark blue indicators at the end of the line that you can see, which have to do with food systems, local food systems, the existence of social networks, and the existence of mechanism for knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing. So we see very strong links between the degree of transition towards agroecology and the existence of social networks and platform for exchange of knowledge. The only one that we find negative here in this list, you see the only red one is actually the variable that is no livestock. So the only negative correlation we found was for farms that don't have any livestock in our sample. And this is something that I'm going to detail a bit more. So for example, here you have, it's just a representation of the correlation that I just mentioned. This one is how far they are advanced on agroecology and the agrobiodiversity index for all 10 countries. And then you have the score for individual countries on, the plots for individual countries on the right side. So you see in some countries you have stronger correlations than others. For example, in Burkina Faso or in Uganda, you seem to have higher correlations than in Senegal, for example. And same thing for the level of transition and the existence of local food systems. And you see again, for example, this is particularly strong in Mali, in Tanzania, or in Mozambique, and a bit less evident in terms of correlation in Senegal and Burkina Faso. So now looking at the animals, if I go back to this variable of no animals, you see here again this variable that is negatively correlated to a lot of performance indicator. For example, in terms of economic performance, value added of the agricultural production, farms without animals seem to be farms with less added value, but also negatively correlated to, for example, the nutrition score. Is here the first variable here is called household diversity, dietary diversity score, and farms that have no livestock seem to be ranking lower on this indicator. But when we look at another variable of livestock, which is the total amount of tropical livestock units, so when you aggregate all animals in one unit, for example, one cow would be 0.7 or 1, depending on the size, and a goat can be 0.1 or 0.2 of a tropical livestock unit. You see that most variables are also positively correlated with tropical livestock units, in particular agrobiodiversity again. So it seems that in our sample, farms that had more animals were also farms that had a higher agrobiodiversity score, but also very interestingly, higher women's empowerment scores. And this is good to see in actual numbers, because we observe on the field very often that the presence of animals, especially small stock, for example, goats, sheep, and chicken, they are a source of women's empowerment at household level, because they provide an activity and an income that will be managed only by the woman in the household, and would create a source of income for this woman. And this income at household level is often invested in higher nutrition and also in education of children. So this is something that we're happy to see as well. And just to illustrate a little bit of these results, we have here again the same distribution as before, but we're looking into the number of tropical livestock unit on farms and the added value of the agricultural production. And we seem to find, again, a positive correlation between the presence of animals and a higher presence of animals, and the income generated at farm level. So just to conclude now, what we aim to show with these results is that agroecology is an approach that can increase sustainability in our food systems, and we have good indicators already for Sub-Saharan Africa, and we're working on getting the same similar results for other regions. What we want to show is also that farm animals, they do play an important role in the agroecological transitions, and we have numbers to show that, and harmonized numbers. Again, we're not talking anymore about success stories or specific case studies, but we're looking into, in this case, what I presented, over 8 countries and 3,000 farms. So something that we want to generate as harmonized evidence and of large-scale value for policymakers. And they're especially valuable for adding economic value on the farm, for women's empowerment, for agricultural biodiversity, nutrition, and also soil fertility to some extent. But also in terms of methods, what one takeaway from this work, I think, is that the use of multi-criteria tools like TAPE, but there are others as well, they can help address the different trade-offs that exist between the SDGs that Martin presented in the introduction. Sometimes when you work on productivity, you will lose a little bit in terms of environmental outcomes or in terms of resilience, for example. So multi-criteria tools like this, they can help you see when you're losing on one side and increasing on another side, and they can help policymakers make the appropriate decision. Just to conclude, because we're here with ETH and our science partners, we're really involved in continuous improvements and refinement of TAPE. We're working with Agroscope, especially on biodiversity, but also on other dimensions with other science partners. We're very happy with the partnership we have with ETH on that. Thank you. And I think I will give the floor to Anna now.
Thank you for the nice presentation. Yeah, I will share my screen now. 1 second. So I hope this is working. You will tell me if not. Okay, yeah, I'm happy to present you now the topic from another, a little bit different point of view. So as I said, I'm working in the ruminant research group, and my research focus is really animal science and not agroecology, but together with 2 of my colleagues, Daniel Bretscher and Lutz Meerbold, that are experts in the field, we prepared this presentation for you today. So in the next 20 minutes, we will focus now, maybe you can guess it from the picture, on the Swiss context, and more specifically on research examples that deal with animal health and agroecology in ruminants. So first of all, just I would like to show you how agroecology is located in Agroscope. So it is one of the 6 research focuses. So it's very important for Agroscope. And here the main aim is to optimize agricultural production according to agroecological approaches. Another research focus I would like to point out already here is the impact is agriculture in a changing climate. So the impact of agriculture on climate is not explicitly part of agroecology, or not yet, but it is very important to us to make the link between agroecology and the climate impact of agriculture. And we will see that later also in the presentation. So now back to agroecology. Which kind of research does Agroscope? As Anne already mentioned, Agroscope is part of the TAPE project and is the first institution that tests and develops the tool in a northern country, that is Switzerland. And specifically, Agroscope helps to improve this indicator for biodiversity. Anne mentioned this already also. And then there are a lot of research projects that deal with animal health and that are relevant for agroecological production systems. And for Agroscope, or for us, animal health does not only mean the absence of disease, but includes also welfare, behavior, nutrition, housing, and limiting stress situations. And before I present you now some research examples, we will quickly have a more general look on the role and contribution of ruminants to agroecological systems. So first of all, in the food chain or in the food systems, the ruminant is a food producer, and yeah, with a special capacity that ruminants can transform human inedible resources, for example, grasslands, into food, especially protein. And thanks to this capacity, the ruminant is especially interesting for agroecological production systems because, as also unmentioned in the already, the decreasing inputs is one of these 5 key agroecological principles for livestock systems. And yeah, I don't go here in the details. Again, you see these 10 key or principles of agroecology and how in orange you see how the ruminant can contribute to these principles. Maybe just 2 examples that are also especially important then in Switzerland, as for example, in Switzerland you have a lot of grasslands, and this capacity of the ruminant to transform, for example, grasslands into food. Ruminants can reduce the food competition, so cropland can be used for human consumption and not for animal consumption or for feeding animals. And another contribution more on the cultural or yeah, human and social values part would be that ruminant systems help to preserve traditions. They generate employment and enhance rural and small scale economies, especially in these mountain areas or very rural areas in Switzerland. And yeah, this picture of the ruminant is now very focused on agroecology. And just to tell you that this is not the whole reality. I mean, for sure in Switzerland, there are also low input systems with ruminants, but on the other side, especially in the lowlands, we also have high productive systems with higher intensities and higher inputs. And as diverse are the ruminant systems in Switzerland, as diverse are also the 3 research examples that I will present you now. First example is a project where the research question was which cow type for low input systems. So as yeah, the name low input system tells already, there's intrinsically a limited nutrient provision or nutrient intake for animals. So, and if you have high productive animals, as we are mostly used to have, there might be the risk of undernutrition for these animals and also the consequences that are then related to yeah, status of undernutrition. And in this project, colleagues of mine made a trial over 3 years in an organic dairy herd where they compared 2 systems, 2 low input systems, so an all herbage system and a herbage-based system where concentrates were also supplemented, so 105 kilograms per year per cow. And they investigated how 2 cow types were performing in these 2 systems. So they compared a Swiss Holstein cow type with a New Zealand Holstein cow. And what they found out was that the New Zealand Holstein cows were much better adapted than the Swiss cows. So the Swiss cows got very lean during lactation. The New Zealand cows were much better in maintaining their body reserves, and they were also much more fertile, which is a crucial aspect in these low input systems. So, and the take home message is that, yeah, you need or we need adapted animals if we want to use these low or such low input systems. What we do in dairy cows, now it's a, yeah, just an overview slide here. Yeah, other colleagues did also with beef cattle. So here the same research or a similar research question, which beef type for which system. There are also compared or the beef cattle in more extensive and more intensive systems. Then there's another group working on agroforestry. Here, the question is more how to face climate change. So if in the future there will be more high temperatures or droughts during summer, which alternative feed resource can we provide to our livestock when the grass is not growing anymore? And here they test trees as an alternative and see how the animals behave and the nutrient intake. Another topic in, especially also in grazing or herbage-based systems is heat stress, and colleagues of mine and myself also are testing different strategies to mitigate heat stress in herbage-based systems, especially with dairy cows that are sensitive to heat stress. So, for example, there was a project on providing shadow on pasture, and other projects focused more on nutritional strategies to mitigate heat stress. Now we go in a different research example where it's more about recycling and circularity. So here we try to recycle former food products in dairy systems. So we said that there are today cow types or that need sometimes concentrates, or at least at a certain point, maybe in their life, for example, in the beginning of lactation. And as concentrates mainly consist of cereals, and when you give them to the animals, you increase the feed food competition. And this is actually not what we would like to in a sustainable point of view. So here the question was if we can replace the concentrates or the part of the concentrates by former food products. Here we used bakery byproducts, for example, chocolate, biscuits, bread, pasta, and so on. And we we want to know if we can use them without compromising cow health and production. So here we just compare cows that have a control concentrate with cows that have a concentrate containing these bakery byproducts, and we investigate the health and performance and also emissions of the cows. And this project is currently ongoing, so I don't have results yet to present, but maybe soon. Another, oops, it's going a bit wherever, never mind, is a project, that is focusing on limiting pre-slaughter stress. So as you might know, the slaughter period is very stressful for cattle. So when they are loaded, transported, unloaded, and they are in a new environment and so on. And in Switzerland, since 2020, there is an alternative. You can, it's authorized to slaughter animals or cattle on farm. And in this project, we compare together with colleagues from the FIBE, the on-farm slaughter with the slaughter at the slaughterhouse. So we compare animals that are slaughtered on farm, so stunned on farm, and then the carcass, so the dead animals transported to the slaughterhouse, with animals that are slaughtered at the abattoir. So they are transported as a living being and then slaughtered at the slaughterhouse. And we are interested here in pre-slaughter stress levels. So we know already from previous preliminary studies that the on-farm slaughter is less stressful. And we also want to make the link to meat quality, because it's known that stress in the slaughter period can lower meat quality. But in this context, with the on-farm slaughter, it has not yet been investigated so well. And also this project has just started, so I cannot present any results. Now we will go over to this other research focus, the agriculture in a changing climate. And I will give you also some examples. So Agroscope Daniel Bretsche actually and his group are studying the increasing heat stress under climate change. So in this graph, you can see on the x-axis the different locations in Switzerland, and on the y-axis you see the number of days with high temperatures and relative humidity. And you see that So with different models for the future for the next 30 years, so this is an extreme model and this is a mild model, um, you see that the temperatures and the relative humidity will increase in the next 30 years. And this is just yeah, a proof that we have to work on solutions to adapt to these changes. So not only dairy cows are sensitive to heat stress, also other animals and plants. And yeah, we have to face this challenge and think about robust animal and plant types that can stand these changes. Um, yeah, another research point or topic is the contribution of livestock to greenhouse gases and also the contribution of animal health on yeah, greenhouse gases. So, as you might all know, livestock is producing greenhouse gases or emissions, and they depend mostly on feed intake. So, the more the cow eats, the more emissions that will produce. And the feed intake depends on the performance of the cow, which is again a function of the maintenance, growth, activity, pregnancy, or milk production. And the performance is again influenced by some parameters that are also related to animal health, for example, breeding, longevity, fertility, production intensity, feeding strategies, and herd management. And all these points that are linked to animal health might also be levers to reduce in the end or mitigate emissions. And yeah, some of them are synergic. So when you improve one, the other will also be improved and everything is fine. On the other hand, there are also some points of these parameters that are trade-offs. And um, yeah, for example, if you increase the production intensity, normally you will lower the emissions that are produced by kilogram or unit of produced milk, for example, or meat. On the other hand, if you increase the production intensity, you might also decrease the fertility. When you decrease the fertility, and then the animal will be less productive, and then you again would increase actually the emissions produced by unit of product. So yeah, it's really a trade-off, and it's not so easy. Yeah, things are complex. And um, yeah, now we will look at two levers here. So first of all, the longevity. So we know that the older a dairy cow gets, the more lactation she makes, the lower is the carbon footprint per kilogram of produced milk. So actually, it would be favorable to have animals that are long lasting and yeah, that live for a long time. So in Switzerland, the FIBE also wants to enhance the longevity and makes efforts and research for this. And in these research projects, we found out, or it is known that a lot of slaughters of dairy cows are linked to low fertility or also diseases, mastitis, for example. But so if you would enhance the fertility, you might also enhance or prolong, yeah, or enhance, improve, no, increase the longevity of cows. So this might be beneficial. But recently, the FIBE reported that actually only 20 to 30% of these departures or cows slaughtered are linked to fertility problems. So actually, the whole rest must be explained by something else. And they found out that the high market prices for meat have an influence. So farmers, because the meat price is high, farmers would rather sell their cow or slaughter their cow, their dairy cow, than to keep her to produce milk and make a lot of lactations. And in the future, this might be even aggravated in times, for example, of drought, like this year, because when there's drought and you have limited feed resources to feed your livestock, then you would also rather slaughter them than to keep them. So Yeah, another lever to mitigate eventually emissions is the production intensity. So here you can see that the more milk the cow produces in the lactation, the lower will be her carbon or the carbon footprint per kilogram of produced fat and protein corrected milk. And yeah, this is might be a good strategy. On the other hand, the more milk one single cow produces, the less cows in total are needed to produce a certain amount of milk. And the less animals and also cows and calves are available for the meat market, and in a society where the meat consumption is at a certain level, you have to compensate this. And this might be with meat systems. So, for example, suckler cows, and if you need and that are low productive and high emitting. So on the herd level or on the total population level, then you will lower the production and increase actually emissions. So yeah, it's really a trade-off here as well. And also a second thing is when you have these high producing animals, they require also more concentrates. So you again have a higher feed food competition, and actually from a sustainability point of view would rather lower the feed or want to reduce the feed food competition. So yeah, this is just to say that things are very complex, and we should not lose the view of the whole system, as said in the beginning also. Um, yeah. Now the take-home messages. So ruminants play an important role in the transformation of the agriculture and food system, especially in the Swiss context. There are a wide range of ongoing research projects that evaluate the agroecological potential, and not only Agroscope, also FIBEL and other institutions. And Agroscope tries to always have the system view. So we try to include also climate co-benefits of livestock in agroecological production systems. Yeah, this is now the end of my talk. And I will stop to present.
Very much, Anna and Ann, for presentations and taking us into field of trade-offs between, at one hand, rearing animals, knowing all the negative impacts of animals, environment, but also stressing the agroecological systems. So far, I don't see any questions from the Q&A, so that's always the privilege of the moderator to then ask a question. And I've noted two things. You have highlighted both the importance of animal production, healthy animals within agroecological context. Knowing the environmental impact, how would you balance between the positive effect and the negative effect from a farmer's perspective on one hand, but also more from a food system perspective? Other, I assume these answers wouldn't be the same if you ask, if you take a farmer's perspective versus a food. Who wants to start?
Maybe I can give it a go. I'm not sure we can have the answer as scientists. We can provide data, we can analyze scenario, we can come up with the best framework for analysis, and as you said in your intro, have a very holistic approach to assessing the impacts. But there will always be trade-offs, and it's a decision of policymakers and to some extent consumers in high-income countries. And I don't think we can we can really give the answer as scientists again. What we can do in addition to just providing the evidence is maybe recommend some scenario that would have a higher outcome in terms of food security and nutrition. And I think I'm insisting here on nutrition because this is something that we tend to overlook also in high-income countries. We have a strong focus on environmental outcomes, which is good, and we should not stop that. But we've maybe overlooked the nutritional outcome. Just an example, at the moment, I don't know if you knew, but when I learned that, I was very surprised. 1/3 of women in the world have iron deficiency, they're anemic. And this proportion is not only in low and middle income countries, it's also 1/3 of women in the United States or in the UK, for example. And this is a consequence of our diets becoming less rich and in terms of nutrients, and richer in what we call now highly processed food, and which are very poor in terms of nutrition. So also what we sometimes call empty calories. And we have in our agricultural research agenda, especially in high-income countries, looked a lot to environmental outcomes, but neglected a little bit the nutritional outcomes. So it's also our role, I think, to remind policymakers and the public and consumers on the importance of other dimensions that maybe are not really studied at the moment, and to reintroduce them in, again, those multi-criteria framework assessment. But this is really the point of view at global level, I would say, from the FAO perspective. Maybe Anna has different elements to provide for Switzerland. Over.
No, I don't have a solution for Switzerland. And yeah, as I said, I'm not the expert in agroecology, and on this very holistic view, maybe neither. But yeah, I think research from my perspective, yeah, we can contribute, as you said, actually, to provide data and maybe scenarios that are working in one or another situation for some farmers, for others not. And there maybe it's also again the yeah the in the end it's the diversity also of the whole system that makes um, yeah, that makes it working. I don't know, and hard to answer for me.
You both, yes, indeed. It was a bit a tricky question. I guess it's really trying to include, and that's what agroecology asks us to do, include various elements, enlarges, of course, also the complexity of trade-offs between these different elements. There is a more practical and very concrete question from Young. Is dual purpose cattle better for agroecology and the environment? I guess that links maybe a bit to your research project you presented on the high production versus.
I mean, in the as we talked in the beginning about the contributions that ruminants can make in general to agroecology. So for sure, if you have a dual breed, you create somehow some diversity in your system. No, you can either go for the meat or more on the dairy. Oh, you have both of them, and for the farmer, it's two incomes or income strategies. So this would be maybe the diversity point, or an economical point for the farmer. Then we also said if it's a lower production level might increase actually the footprint per produced product. So as we already said, it's a trade-off, and I think there is no one answer.
You want to comment, or shall we go to the next? Then I have a question for you. Nicola is asking whether he interprets one of your first figures rightly on there seems to be a negative correlation between the 10 elements of agroecological transition on that graph you showed with land tenure. Is that then correct to assume that there is a negative correlation between those agroecological transition elements and land tenure? And please on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, it's actually the second time only I present those results, and I got this question the first time around. So I see that the audience is really paying attention. It's great to see. Yeah, so we did have some negative correlation for land tenure and some of the elements, and I did not spend some time on that. I can do it now. They're very low. So some of them are, you know, lower than 0.05 in terms of correlation. So they're really low correlation compared to the positive score we had. The ones that we should look at actually is land tenure for women and the link with the element of diversity. So this is something we haven't looked into in details. I think that's an interesting one because we do see okay or positive correlation on land tenure and all the elements of social transition, for example, co-creation of knowledge, human and social value, it's actually more understandable. But this one on diversity and to a lesser extent maybe synergies and land tenure for women, we would have to look into it, and especially to see what were the actual data collected. The way we estimated land tenure was in terms of whether the access to land was secured for men and for women separately, whether they had a title of property or an actual document for renting the land, or if it was a verbal agreement, things like this, and whether the perception of this access to land was also secure for women and for men, or if they perceived that they did not have secure access to land. So it may be because of the perception, and it's stronger for women than for men, but it's definitely something we want to look at into more details. Thank you.
We are looking forward to these results then. One last question to finalize. One question of Ruth. She enjoyed your presentation both. She thanks you for that. And she was wondering whether agroecological practices are also looked at in the UK. And given the high population density and the competition for land, whether agroecological approaches do work or possible in places like the UK.
Well, maybe I can start, and maybe Anna can complement. I don't think. I mean, yes, I would say that those agroecological approaches are relevant for the UK. I don't think it's a particular case that we see in the UK in terms of agroecosystems that would prevent any types of approaches like this, especially, you know, the density of population. We have this in other countries. Switzerland is not only mountains, it has very densely populated areas as well. France as well, Germany as well, and agroecology is an approach that is considered in these countries, even in legal and political frameworks. So I don't see a reason why it cannot work. And in addition to that, what we tend to refer to is more an agroecological transition. It's just the same debate that we used to have about sustainability. Sustainability is not a state, it's a process, it's a transfer from one status to another. And I think we can also talk about an agroecological transition wherever we're starting from, which is a different starting point in different production systems, even within the same country. So I don't see that it would not be relevant for the UK.
Thank you very much, Anna. Is there no? Then thank you very much, both of you. We invite you for the second session with the students just in a bit. And audience, we thank you very much for being with us tonight here at ETH. and see you next week again for another topic.